This is Our News, the weekend edition. And on the broadcast tonight, the Prime Minister announces the creation of a new ministry to deal with disaster preparedness and response. Plus, those hurricane-ravaged areas declared as special economic recovery zones. Find out what that means. And we speak with one hurricane relief volunteer who shares her experience with the whole process.
Our News is brought to you by Alive.
Good evening, I'm Andrew Knowles, and thanks so much for joining us. Topping news tonight, in the aftermath of unprecedented circumstances resulting from Hurricane Dorian, government has established a new Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction. The primary focus is to coordinate the national response for recovery and the subsequent reconstruction of Grand Bahama and Abaco.
We must, and we will, rebuild and restore Grand Bahama and Abaco stronger and more resilient.
The creation of the Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction comes not only in response to the widespread destruction from Hurricane Dorian, but also as the country faces a climate in crisis.
We must make immediate and medium-term changes. But as a small island developing state with many islands and many keys, there are many long-term changes and restructuring that required a dedicated cabinet ministry.
Central Grand Bahama MP Iram Lewis will head up the new ministry and will be sworn in on Monday as Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister. Legislation for the creation of the new board is currently being drafted and is expected to be brought to Parliament once it resumes on October 2nd. As for how the board will function,
how this would be set up, we'd have an executive or managing director, and we'd have a board. The board would comprise of professional entities. Example, the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Abaco. You'll have a representative from East Grand Bahama. You'll have architects, engineers, businessmen, bankers, professionals, so as to make decisions. They have the mandate to redesign, rebuild both Abaco and East Grand Bahama without any interference or government obstructive bureaucracy.
No budget has been allocated as yet for the new ministry. However, the Prime Minister says that will be up for discussion on Tuesday during the next cabinet meeting. The new ministry will now assume responsibility for the National Emergency Management Agency, Disaster Preparedness, Response Relief and Recovery.
Disaster preparedness will also include implementing and overseeing the enforcement of mandatory evacuation orders. And I note that the government is still in the consultative stage on legislation for these proposed orders. No final decisions have been made in terms of legislation.
While addressing the work ahead, Lewis says they will have to take a layered approach to the cleanup in Abaco as the recovery process is still very active.
In order to clean Abaco of debris, rebuild utilities and critical infrastructure, it is my goal to ensure that the work must be carried out can be done in a very timely manner. We will need to deploy teams to Abaco and will therefore, once the green light is given by the Environmental Health Department and other relevant agencies, begin preparing laydown areas for materials and erecting temporary housing facilities for the team that will carry out the necessary infrastructural work.
And as for Grand Bahama,
we will work along with the Grand Bahama Port Authority to revisit the building code as they pertain to flood-prone areas. We must also address the topic of proper disaster shelters throughout both islands. It is my intention to address the west end of Grand Bahama also. This area has experienced flooding on too many occasions, and the residents are subject to the slow rebuilding and revitalization process that follows.
Meantime, East Grand Bahama, Abaco, and the Abaco Keys have been designated as special economic recovery zones. According to Prime Minister Minnis, the designation will last for an initial period of 3 years. It's a vital move needed to restore commerce in the affected areas so that displaced residents can move back home with jobs and economic opportunities.
This designation, modeled after what is already in place for the Over the Hill initiative, will enable the communities impacted by Hurricane Dorian to benefit from a broad range of tax breaks and incentives. They will also benefit from other means of support that will restore the various economies and indeed, over time, make these economies more vibrant.
Among the measures are duty-free purchases of oil materials, fixtures, furniture, vehicles, and equipment. There is also a waiver of business license fees for operations within the zone, as well as a waiver on real property tax on all eligible properties. Government is also establishing a $10 million loan guarantee and equity financing program for qualifying Bahamian small and medium-sized businesses to secure up to $500,000 in financing.
The provisions under the Special Economic Recovery Zone are intended to encourage and facilitate the rapid restoration of commerce in the affected areas so as to fulfill the government's core objective of ensuring that Grand Bahamians and Abaconians can restart their lives on their own home islands.
Well, the Prime Minister will travel to Grand Bahama this week Wednesday, to review the progress of recovery efforts on that island. But that won't be the only item on the Prime Minister's agenda, as he announced some good news for Grand Bahama.
During that visit, a heads of agreement will be signed with the Carnival Corporation for the new cruise port. It is more vital now than ever to continue with our economic development program for Grand Bahama.
It was back in August when the Prime Minister announced that government had struck a deal with Carnival Cruise Line for a cruise port in Grand Bahama. The project is expected to cost at least $100 million and produce more than 1,000 direct and indirect permanent jobs on the island. Well, Minister of Finance Peter Turnquest says with all eyes on the government of the Bahamas following Hurricane Dorian, he is very concerned as to how donations will be handled, as he wants to ensure that this government is completely transparent with the public.
We're very concerned to make sure that we are accountable and transparent with the Bahamian public in the first instance, but more particularly with the donor community who would have given money to assist in this effort. We want to make sure that we are completely transparent, completely accountable, so that we can provide feedback to our donors and exactly how their monies have been spent.
According to Turnquest, reports will be made quarterly on how the funds are being spent.
We're committed to ensuring that every dollar that is donated is actually goes to the hands for the benefit of those people who have been affected. No administrative fees, no administrative costs will be deducted from that. 100% of that money goes to the Bahamian people that are affected. And so we've put in place a financial controller to oversee. We've got an audit process engaged to audit those reports to make sure that there is transparency again and there's accountability.
Well, a former Minister of State for Immigration is tonight slamming comments made by two previous Prime Ministers regarding the current Prime Minister and hurricane restoration efforts. In an interview with Our News, Vil McCartney said when he served as a cabinet minister during the last Ingram administration, he tried to deal with immigration issues, but that the powers above him got in the way. He spoke with our Kyle Joaquin.
The question is, what are they going to do? They have had an opportunity over the last 25 plus years to run this country. They have allowed, in particular, the shanty towns to remain. So what are they going to do? The damage has been done.
McCartney said he was beyond disappointed to hear the statements made by former Prime Ministers Perry Christie and Hubert Ingram just after their trip to North Abaco, where they saw the devastation left behind by Hurricane Dorian. Both Ingram and Christie said they offered their help to Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis, but had yet to hear from him. The next day, Minnis released a statement refuting Ingram's claim and expressing disappointment in both men. McCartney said while he isn't taking up for Minnis, Ingram and Christie should accept some of the blame for the country's immigration problem.
We have one prime minister. He's the captain of the ship. At this stage, we are in an emergency, want of a better word. He leads the ship. If he wants to consult with you, he'll do it. If he doesn't, he wouldn't. So I think, to answer your question, it was completely unnecessary.
McCartney served as Minister of State for Immigration between 2007 and 2010, but resigned and eventually formed the Democratic National Alliance. He said during his tenure as a cabinet minister, he tried to deal with shantytowns and immigration issues, but ran into numerous roadblocks from the powers that be.
I got the community together, the defense force, police, as well as the immigration officers, where we had an immigration watch, just like a crime watch. And I was told that was not the policy of the administration I was a part of.
That's part of the reason why he was on.
There were instances when we were told there were illegal immigrants at certain places and on certain days, and we would prepare for an apprehension, and you're told not to apprehend.
Immigration Minister Ellsworth Johnson said while repatriation exercises on Abaco and Grand Bahama have been relaxed, once things die down, the law will take its course for those undocumented migrants. However, McCartney is of the view that everyone should be registered, documented or not.
The fact that these persons would have probably been here in any event had the hurricane not happened, right? Had the hurricane not happened, listen to me closely, had the hurricane not happened, these persons would have still be in the country. So they are in the country. We ought to have an opportunity to register who they are, give them an opportunity to apply for certain status with the Immigration Department, which will be determined or renewable after a year. Thereby, they are in a position to now contribute to society, pay their taxes, open up bank accounts, and so on and so forth.
For Our News Weekend, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
All right, thanks a lot, Kyle. Well, over the past 2 weeks, thousands of people have been evacuated from islands hard hit by Hurricane Dorian. At the front lines of those evacuations have been volunteers that have played a major role in the deadly storm's aftermath. One of those volunteers, who has been working with social services, is speaking up about her experience. Our Jasmine Brown fills us in.
With officials estimating more than 21,000 households and 70,000 people impacted by Hurricane Dorian, the Ministry of Social Services has been on the front lines of post-Dorian relief. Psychology student Joycelyn Artie says when she got the call that volunteers were needed to assist with evacuees, she knew she could not say no.
When the call was made, there was no doubt that I'd want to help. There was no doubt at all.
Dorian was a Category 5 storm when it lashed Grand Bahama and Abaco for more than 2 days, destroying entire communities with pounding winds and historically high sea surges. Many of those residents evacuated to New Providence. Artie was one of many volunteers who greeted them at the ports of entry.
I've been at the docks primarily welcoming any and everybody.
She says the hardest part was seeing the kids impacted by the storm.
I work with children, so any area that affects children affects me personally. So when I heard that, hey, there would be some children displaced, families who are looking for children, families who may have lost their children, that affected.
Since Dorian, more than 24 kids have been placed in children's homes across New Providence. Then there were the desperate family members searching for their loved ones.
Some of the boats were taking women and children, they were taking seniors, and then they were taking the men out. I had this gentleman, he came on the boat with a group of other young men, and he sat there quiet in the corner, and I walked up to him. I said, all the buses are leaving, you need to get on a bus. He's like, I can't. I said, why, what happened? He said, my wife and children He has 3 children and his wife. They came on the boat ahead of him, but he don't know where they ended up, where they are, what's going on. I'm not leaving the docks until I find my wife and children. And as we were talking, we were told another boat was coming in. And out of the blue, these 2 little boys, a 10-year-old and a little 5-year-old, started screaming, "Daddy, Daddy." He looked up. His wife and kids came, and he just broke down in tears. Stuff like that is what we try to do. Try to encourage persons that even though it may not be big, but family reunification, that's always a beautiful thing.
RD says it's those happy moments in the midst of a crisis that makes their work worth it. Reporting for Our News, I'm Jasmine Brown.
Well, still ahead tonight, how to safeguard your hurricane donations. That story and more when Our News, the Weekend Edition, returns.